Friends and enemies, welcome to yet another edition of the Canadian Bitcoiners podcast. And I'm going to do this one solo. Joey is doing some fiat mining right now. And it's my lunch and I'm going to be doing this all by myself. But before we go any further, just want to say who's sponsoring today's show. And of course, is Easy DNS. And it's a great spot for services related to Anycast, DNS, domain name registrations, web hosting, and email hosting. Now, even we are going to be doing email hosting and web hosting through them. We're still in the process of transitioning our emails over to them, but also having our website established. It's a long and drawn out process. And also a lot of other things you could do over there with Easy DNS, NIP5, you're good to go. Nostr Relays, got that one as well. So they're very in tune with the Bitcoin community. They're fast, reliable, and privacy focused. In fact, you could even pay with Bitcoin. Apply the coupon code CBP Media for 50% off the initial purchase and check them out, easydns.com. So without further ado, I want to bring in the guest. It's Jan Čapek from, hopefully I pronounced it correctly, from Braiins. Ahoy, Jan. How are you?
Ahoy. Good to be here. You pronounce it perfectly.
Thank you. My check, as I was mentioning in the backstage, it's all due to my watching of hockey over the years, and it's I think I've attained a decent accent grasp of the Czech language.
Very well done. Very well
thank
done.
Thank you. So, your first time coming on the Canadian Bitcoiners podcast, a lot of people have been hearing us talk about the praises of Braiins in the past little while because I've used it in the past with the OS on a S9 that I have, but before we go anywhere, Jan, I want to talk about you because people may not be familiar about who you are. Give us a little background about who you are and how you got into Bitcoin.
All right. So this was back in 2013, where we had a unique chance to basically take over the slush pool at that time. It was named slush pool. Now it's called Braiins Pool. And we basically turned this one-man project into a professional scale endeavor, let's say. And that's where my Bitcoin adventure started. I remember back in 2013, I was thinking I'm kind of late to the party because, Bitcoin has been out for almost 4 years if we count 2029. So that's when we started building and transforming the pool into a professional style of business and running it with an actual company in the background. And that's Braiins, or Braiins Systems is the full name of the company, but we like to shorten it and present it as Braiins because it's easier. Probably 2017, we started thinking what would be the next step or extension in our product line, what we should come up with. And we were thinking, okay, we have these mining machines that are connecting to our pool. And we started looking into what's actually running on these machines. And we had some chance actually working on a firmware for, at that time, silicon machines called, I think, T1s. Unfortunately, the business deal didn't really work out with that company, but we were left with a firmware with our hands. So we're like, what we're going to do with it? So we decided to give it a name. That's where the Braiins OS name came from. And we also ported it to, at that time, very popular miner S9. So this was the first step in extending our product line. And since then, we came up with a few improvements. We turned it again into a commercial solution called Braiins OS Plus. And here we are. It's 2023. The company scaled up to 8,500 people.
Wow.
And we're pulling all these products. I have one more item that's coming out soon, but I will leave it for later in the podcast.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in a bit. Now,
Okay.
I just want to discuss the Braiins OS Plus, the firmware. Discuss exactly what that is for people who are unaware.
So originally, our idea is that we wanted to have a fully open source firmware because at that time, even datasheets for the S9s or for the chips on the S9s were publicly available. And you could download also bits and pieces of the source code, except for some critical components that were running in the FPGA on the control board. And we decided to put all these bits and pieces together and make it easier for the users, thinking that the business model would be okay. If we are a mining pool and if we provide you with a firmware, that is like fully open source everything. You're going to just mine with us, and that's going to be our source of revenue that we can reinvest into developing the firmware further. However, actually this was not really the case. People did like the firmware, but not every user wanted to mine with us, and we obviously didn't tie the fact that you use the firmware to also use our pool. So we came up with the idea of Braiins OS Plus, where we would have the basic open source operating system with a special crafted or let's say derived version of the mining software in it called Boss Miner that would allow what we call tuning. So basically, the machine would be running at its optimum conditions depending on what power target or hash rate target the user sets. So this was the idea behind it, and it turned out to be quite successful, because now you can see that quite a few competitors already or also started going down this path.
And the ones that are using it, name the competitors. Is it What's Miner? Is it anybody else?
What's Miner is What's Miner or MicroBT is a manufacturer of mining machines. So these are actually the target machines that we would eventually like to have support for. What's Miner is still on our list and kind of in development, in heavy development, to be supported in Braiins OS. From the Bitmain portfolio, we basically support all the product range coming from S17s and going over all the X19 models, where recently Bitmain started producing different flavors with different control boards. There are basically like 3 different types of control boards, different hashing chips. About like 3 generations of X19s of the hashing chips are already in production and in the market. And mining actively. So we support all these, and that's when things started being very complicated with our basically open source philosophy for the actual core mining software. Because when you take the source code, if you put aside the generic logic that takes care of like Bitcoin mining, job handling, reassembling it into something that the hash boards do understand and so on, it's actually like a pure data sheet for the chips. And obviously, if the business model is based on making some revenue on the firmware, if you publish all this stuff, what the competition is going to do is they're going to look at the sources and say, okay, hey, here we have the full spec that we very thoroughly gain by analyzing what the stock firmware is doing. So that we had to rethink a bit how we're going to approach the whole business model.
Are they all released under like GPL2 or the MIT license?
What we intend to do is that we want to have the operating system itself. So really speaking about the operating system, for the end miners that are built on Zinc boards to be it's based on OpenWRT, which is a Linux distro. It has been like it's an embedded Linux distribution that we have been using for years, also for the S9s. And so we want to go back to this to comply again with the GPL in a way that we're going to provide the operating system in the source form, obviously. But since the core mining software is actually our own code base, even though originally we kind of like GPL'd it with a clause that we can do anything what we want with it, we would provide this as an artifact that you can inject into the build process, and you can assemble your own operating system image for those who, let's say, don't trust us or don't want to download the full machine image. So this is on the roadmap for upcoming, I don't know, couple quarters to actually have this finally out in this form or back in this form again. But unfortunately, we are not able to go back to the full open source ethos, like releasing everything, including the actual mining software. And the specific reason is that the specification for the specs for the chips are not public. They're not even published by the manufacturer. They're not given to us. It's just our best guess how the chips do operate, and releasing this is basically giving away your IP to your competition.
Understood. So how do you reverse engineer this? Is it just through trial and error? Like, what's the process?
I don't like that word. Like, let's call it analyzing it.
Okay.
But let's think about it like this. We've been looking at the machines for years now, like 6-7 years, whatever. And once you kind of get the feel of how the manufacturer actually designs and builds the machines, every new machine that comes to the market from the same manufacturer is kind of very similar. And then what you observe in the behavior, or what you observed in the behavior of the previous generation, are patterns that you're going to see in the upcoming generation, because for good reasons they don't want to change everything from scratch, because it's basically too risky. It's an iterative development. So once you get into this let's say rabbit hole of understanding how the machine from a certain manufacturer operates, when a new machine comes out, it's much easier to understand the meaning of different registers and so on. So this is how we do it. If you speak, if you wanna if I want to be a bit more specific, it's about using a logic analyzer, looking at the communications, and understanding how the bits on the wire actually interact with each other.
Wow, that's so cool. Now, as for the
Sorry for
users,
oversimplifying, but that's
no,
like, I
no.
mean, there is not much to it on this level, but you have to have all the history behind you to kind of like be efficient in that. Like, if you throw this at somebody who has never seen a Bitcoin miner, the task is much tougher than if our engineers look at some machine and say, okay, here is I don't know, voltage controller, and like this
Mhm.
this is how they steer or how they control the PSU, and not too many things do surprise you. But actually, there's one thing that has surprised us, from after the S17 generations, and I think all the manufacturers kind of took this path, is that before that, I would say, like, you were a full owner of the machine, because you bought the machine and you were able to flash it with alternative firmware. You were able to log in. You were able to gain full root access to the machine. And for some reasons, like officially explained as, we are protecting the users and we're protecting you not to lose warranty, we're not giving you the root access anymore. And even worse, you cannot even change easily the firmware, because the control boards that are being used now with the latest machines do have a secure boot enabled. A secure boot is something that's basically a hardware protection on the control board. Some users your audience may know it from their laptops, where you can select when you can enable secure boot in your laptop, and then that means it's going to refuse to boot any operating system image that is not signed by a key for which the public key is actually stored in the machine, if I simplify it. So something similar is done or exactly the same thing is done as a feature on the latest machines. However, it's not done the way that if you are a paranoid miner or paranoid user, you have the option, you can opt in to enable secure boot and even upload your own, let's say, signing key into the machine, or the public part of the key, and then have your secure boot trust chain crafted in-house, because this would be in line with like a general the best security practices, is that you, as a manufacturer of any device that's concerned with security, should not set the policy, and you should not definitely provide any keys. It should be that the user, actually, if they want to use the security features, they do the signing, and they can then protect themselves from, I don't know, some attackers within their facility, if this was the case. But again, if you think about it, the machines are typically, or the security of the machines is typically based on the fact that you have network level security. So the farm is running in a secure environment. If you have random people being able to access the machines. I can think of let's say a very simple and maybe naive scenario, but let's oversimplify again. Nothing prevents these people that you would, for some unknown reason, let into the facility, unplug the hash boards from the original control board and just plug in their own, right? And so the physical access is definitely something that has to be prevented, and the same on the network level, where you can do a lot of things. And that brings me a little bit to the topic of the Bitcoin mining protocol that I didn't mention here. We've been quite busy back in 2017, 18, 19, thinking about a follow-up on the Stratum mining protocol. We now call it Stratum v1, and what is actually out there now is Stratum v2. There is actually a quite agile and active open source community that took over the development, and we're happy about this because we don't want to be let's say like a biased vendor of firmware and at the same time have some hidden agenda in the protocol. So we gave it basically to the community to further develop it. Obviously, we've been using the protocol from day one for past couple of years because we needed it to do the dev fee collection. So that's the business model of the firmware as it was originally designed. So when I go back to the network level security, you can then think, okay, what is happening when the miner is actually submitting shares and asking for mining jobs? And if it's using just the plain Stratum v1 protocol, this is unencrypted. So you don't need to physically attack the miner and tamper with the wires or exchange the control board. You can go much easier if you attack the network directly and just steal a little bit of the hash rate from the unencrypted traffic, which actually is and was a case of some smaller facilities in China where these would be using like standard small routers like TP-Links, whatever, and these have a lot of security holes. So viruses have very little opportunities to steal money, but Bitcoin is an excellent use case where you can actually steal something if you install such virus into the router. And if you're not greedy and would be stealing like 100% of the shares of the hash rate, which would be easily notified. If you're stealing just 2%, 2% out of a lot of hash rate could be important enough money and not enough for the mining facility to notice. So that's why the network level security is super important, but still it can be much more improved and strengthened if the miners are using some more robust protocol, which provides encryption and some integrity checks of the data. So the Stratum v2 natively has the security concern basically covered because it's using authenticated encryption and associated data with it. So what that means, the data is encrypted. If somebody tampers it, the protocol detects it and basically breaks down. So there's no easy way to tamper with the traffic or to even steal the hash rate. You can think about it as TLS or whatever we use when we connect to our internet banking, HTTPS. That's basically the same level, just a different protocol.
That's a really good explanation of what Stratum v2 has to offer in comparison to Stratum v1. Now,
just one thing, but there's some more.
Well, in terms of the industry as a whole, I know it's hard for you to talk about other mining pools as well. Is Stratum v2 industry standard?
It is slowly becoming an industry standard. I would say the movement or the activity around Stratum v2 caught up. I would say like 1 year ago, and the community seems to be very active. They're especially concerned about the part of the protocol that's not related to the pure mining job distribution, but it's related to miners being able to select their own templates of blocks. And basically pools would be just validating that the template complies with their policy, let's say, and the policy would be that the block reward has to go to the pool wallet so that it can be redistributed to the miners. The reason for this is that we're seeing that a lot of regulations are slowly sneaking into our industry, and it's not needed like at this exact stage or point, but it may be needed as a security measure for future development, where for legal reasons it would not be, for example, possible for a legit pool. So let's say a pool that's backed by a legal entity, not like random pool somewhere in the dark, but for pools that are backed by regular companies, it may not be possible to distribute the block templates to the miners. But this would be a way to decentralize and put the responsibility onto the miners. But it's not the case, but we should be ready for this. So this whole topic of the Stratum v2 protocol is very loaded, and people are very interested in this.
It's a rabbit
well.
hole. It's
Yes,
definitely
yes.
Is that so? To go back then, because we just finished talking earlier about the Braiins OS Plus, and you've come up with a very creative solution on how to attract users running that firmware to come to Braiins Pool, formerly known as Slush Pool. Could you please explain how it is that people could benefit by using Braiins OS and by taking advantage of Braiins Pool?
Well, first of all, when we speak about the security, you're getting the native Stratum v2 support, and currently there are not too many firmwares. Definitely not the original stock firmware that comes with the machines support. It does not support Stratum v2, so you have no security at this point. If you're using the firmware with our pool, you're getting basically zero fee. So that's zero fee for the pool. So this is how the users can benefit from using this combination of the firmware and the pool. If we speak about the firmware itself, I would say the main benefit is the efficiency, or let's say the resulting hash rate at a power level. Let's say you have a machine, an X19 machine that has a nominal power consumption of 3.2 kilowatts, let's say, based on the label on the machine. If you look at the hash rate when running with a stock firmware, you're getting X terahashes per second.
30-ish usually?
X19s are somewhere around like 100, let's say 100 terahash.
Oh no, sorry, talking about watts per terahash. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, and then I didn't want to get into the efficiency part, but okay, we can also mention this. So let's say the machine is doing 100 terahash with a stock firmware at like 3.2 kilowatts, as an example of a machine. If you run our firmware with it, we're gonna find a setting for the machine where it's doing, let's say, something like 105, 110 terahash. So you're gaining 5-10% of hash rate more at the same power level or power consumption. So that boosts the efficiency further.
That's a good way of getting more from your machine.
Right.
You're making it more efficient in terms of the same power, you're increasing your hash rate. But B, by hooking up to the Braiins pool, the fees itself are eliminated. This adds up over time. For a lot of people that aren't aware, the fees they could be quite costly over a long enough period of time, and this would be then ultimately sent back to the end user. I have one question from the audience here, asking what type of payment methods are used by Braiins Pool. Is it FPPS, PPS Plus? Which one is being used and why?
We are one of the pools in the world that has a very exotic reward scheme. It's called scoring, but what is probably the most analogous way explanation is basically it's PPLNS. So we're redistributing the coins that have been minted to the users. Unlike with the PPS pools, where you're being paid by just delivering your shares, regardless of whether the pool finds or doesn't find a block. The pool that has no obligation to pay you out with coins that have been minted with the pool. It could have been trading with the coins, whatever, depending on the terms and conditions. We explicitly distribute the coins that have been minted by the pool. So every round, when a block is found, this is the amount that's being split among the users. So it's not PPS or FPPS plus. I would say the follow-up question would be, and what about the luck? Yes, that's a valid concern. Who takes the risk part? If it's the pool or if it's the user? At the same time, I would say, especially in these days, the rewards paid out with freshly minted coins, okay, with one or two hops through our wallets, but let's say it still leads to the original coins minted with Slush Pool, could become less problematic when you start trading them in KYC exchanges and so on. So there's some advantages.
How come more pools don't operate in this type of system? It sounds like there is quite an advantage for doing so, but doesn't seem like to be industry standard.
It is no longer an industry standard. Again, I agree. I think it's the push of the users, because they want to have they want to be able to predict the rewards that they're gonna make. And obviously with the scoring based or PPLNS based reward scheme, you are still kind of target of the luck.
You know what? That brings us to the next question. What is the pool block luck? Because that seems to be something that is referenced somewhere on your website, or at least when you go look at the websites for mining pools. What is that all about, the block luck?
Okay. So when we go back to the basic principle of mining, blocks are found with a period of 10 minutes, right? But sometimes they're found in less time, sometimes they're found later than 10 minutes. So they follow what we call a Poisson distribution. If the block is found exactly in 10 minutes, so let's say the amount of shares that is required to find the block with a probability of 67%, which is not intuitive, by the way. So basically, there's only a 67% chance that the block is going to be found in 10 minutes, by the way. So this is the luck of 100%, because the amount of shares, the amount of results that have been delivered by the miners matches what is expected at the current difficulty. So if finding the block required less than this amount of shares, then your luck is above 100%, because let's say if I find it in 5 minutes instead of 10 minutes, I have delivered just half of the shares, so the luck would be 200%. And then on the other side, if you find the block in 20 minutes instead of 10 minutes, then your luck is going to be less. The analogy with the 10 minutes is just oversimplification here. Obviously, the pool doesn't have 100% of the share of the network hash rate. So let's say the period of our pool that has something like 3% of the current hash rate is, so it's like 1/30th. So that is probably like 300 minutes, if I calculate it correctly. Every 300 minutes we should find a block. So the same principle applies to it.
So in terms of the hash rate itself, I want to just change the subject briefly. The hash rate network wide is going up quite a bit. I mean, if you look at it in the past 6 months, what are your thoughts on this? Because you have boots on the ground here, and I'd like to hear what your thoughts about this massive increase in the hash rate just in the past little while.
Well, if I look at it from the pool perspective, any hash rate that we don't get on the pool is our negative revenue. We're not happy about it. At the same time, every terahash that appears on the network is our potential business opportunity to get it on the pool and to have it running our firmware. So the point for us as a company is to have as many miners onboarded, either on the pool side or on the firmware side. From the perspective of an individual miner, if they don't scale up their operation, their revenue is shrinking. But at the same time, it's important to also look at the exchange rate that has changed by 100% in a couple of months, basically, right?
I took a look at the hash rate of Braiins Pool, and in comparison to your peers, you're always in the top 10, give or take. Because I guess it's like sometimes you fall outside of the top 10 in terms of overall hash rate for pools, but you're always within the top 10. What are some of the challenges of drawing in new customers? Because I see sometimes you're as high as 6 or 7, but on other times you're as low as 10. So there is a period of time where you go up and down from the rankings of overall hash rate. What are some of the challenges you are experiencing from drawing in mining companies to use your services, and how are you overcoming these challenges?
So one of the aspects that the companies find attractive about us is that we're historically the first Bitcoin mining pool in the world. So we have a lot of legacy behind us. We have a lot of trust behind us. And like from political aspect, this is something that like the regular miners do still appreciate. At the same time, some of the challenges are what has been already mentioned, because generally the expectation from especially bigger companies is to basically eliminate the fact that their revenue could be impacted by luck. They want to put the responsibility on somebody else, which we, for some specific reasons, didn't really want to go through. So this causes the fluctuations. At the same time, we've had recently a lot of new hardware coming to the market. So some of it is still going to the retail users that are the ones that are loyal with the first Bitcoin mining pool in the world and just join with us. So I think this is what you're seeing with the fluctuations.
Well, you know what? It's a good time now to transition to a subject that, well, there's some news that came out from Braiins just today, and I believe it has been announced and brought forth to the world at the Bitcoin conference in Miami. I want to hear more about it. Explain what it is, because it seems that it's very exciting news.
Well, when I was talking about the Braiins OS and the challenges that we had to overcome, or we have to overcome nowadays to have support for the latest Bitcoin mining hardware, we were thinking, okay, let's do something that would actually help the miners to run Braiins OS even on the hardware that is hard to be installed on. And we decided to come up with our own control board. So basically, Braiins control board is coming out at the end of Q2, end of June, with full Braiins OS support. And the details are being shared at the Bitcoin 2023 in Miami.
And this is going to be just a simple swapping out of boards. Is that what an end user would do?
Yes, it would have Braiins OS pre-installed on it, and it would be compatible with all the X19 and minor models. So you just plug it in, you can use it. It's especially for some of the users that do have the locked firmware, let's say, that they cannot switch to Braiins OS easily.
And for people that are not aware, are you able to give just a rough estimate how much more efficient a machine would be? I know we're talking, it's a very generalized term because each machine is different. And not only that, there's a wide variety of S19 machines, but are you able to give it just a rough estimation how much efficiency one may experience? And that's no guarantee with that.
Okay. So an extreme example, and I can be quite specific, on an older model of a T19, which still is a valid model for nowadays, we were able to tuned the machine with the stock settings, so it's been consuming still the same power as if you plug it in with the stock firmware, we were able to go from 88 terahash to 99 just
Wow, that's
by running
quite a
the
jump.
firmware. Yes, so this is more than 10% with the standard settings. But what I want to point out is that the advantage of having the aftermarket firmware of Braiins OS is that you can also change the power target of your machine, so you can either go downclock and reach some good efficiencies. Some users actually have been reporting they were able to tune their machine with Braiins OS. It was an XP machine below 20 joules per terahash, something like 18, 19 joules per terahash, which I find very impressive.
I saw that tweet and about that, and that really is ultimately what miners should be seeking, is efficiency, and you're trying to lower the watts or joules per terahash, because that is really the drive here in terms of going to be how much profit you're going to make. Now, the question I have is then, are you sacrificing, or somebody sacrificing, an S19 board for you to make one of these Braiins control boards? Or is there like a process where one is being sacrificed in the whole process, or are you simply creating one out of scratch?
It's actually one out of scratch.
That's interesting. So it's not sacrificing anything, which is wonderful. In terms of a competition, then, is there? Does WhatsMiner also have something that they are Braiins OS Plus that they could put into their systems as well, or even Canon,
What's
or if I pronounced that correctly, Canon?
right. WhatsMiners are still let's say in progress. I know you were going to ask when WhatsMiner. Adding support for these machines from scratch has been on the tricky side, let's say. And one thing I can say is that the stock firmware is doing quite good job finding a useful configuration of the chips. Obviously not providing a big range of downclocking or overclocking. And that's something that we are trying to bring to the users.
Now, I got one last question to throw to you. This is going to be a huge curveball. Hopefully you can hit this one. Have you ever seen or gotten your hands on any of the now discontinued Intel mining equipment?
I have seen a box as a reference design.
Do you have any comments on it, or is there something that you're unable to disclose? Or
I'm not able to comment on this, but from engineering perspective, a very interesting piece of hardware.
It's too bad it's never going to come to. Well, I mean, some people got it, but it's not going to be mass produced any longer. Any comments about what's going to be happening with the mining industry, not just the pool side, but just on the whole moving forward? Do you have anything that you think that may be happening? Any thoughts? Any concerns?
Well, we've been speaking about this for, well, basically from the very beginning when we started coming up with the idea of the firmware, is that when you come to a general conference, that's a general Bitcoin conference, the Bitcoin mining has been always somewhere in the background and like was kind of assumed to be there. You know what I mean? Like Bitcoins are being mined, but nobody really cared like how they're being mined. And then when you realize that a lot of Bitcoin is being mined in the US, but at the same time, all the hardware that's being used to mine Bitcoin, and let's put aside the Intel activity that has been put aside, it's all coming from China. And we always found this as a risk. And a good manifestation of this in the past have been, for example, the famous ASIC boost affair, where the S9s had that feature built in, but it was not available to all the users. And that's what actually drove us to come up with the firmware and say, okay, we think it can do ASIC boost, and we actually made that announcement and analysis and published the paper that explained the details, what we discovered. And magically in a week, Bitmain actually released a version of the firmware that already had support for for ASIC boost, and we just took over the FPGA code to use it. So these things are all risks for the Bitcoin mining, but at the same time, I'm not complaining about it, because it's, in the end, it's all incentive game, right? So if enough businesses are seeing opportunity to be active in this area and develop something new, something, let's say, not based in China, they're going to do it. If it's not economically viable or sustainable, it's not going to happen. And we'll see, I think, in the very near future. And we have seen with the case of Intel that there was some driver to actually push a Western-based company to produce a mining hardware.
That's
and there
what
have been
Intel-
other companies in the past, but most of them don't exist anymore. The KNC guys and Spondoolies and so on. So I think this is the era where the landscape is gonna change. Also, on a long run, when you look at the competitive advantages, if you run a big farm, I think where all this is going to end up being is that big farms and big companies that are mining Bitcoin will want to have the full supply chain. And in their case, it's going from the mining machines down to the facilities where they run them to have fully under control, which means they will probably not want to buy them from some vendors, but they would want to, the same way as they build out their facility, they may want to have their own production of the machines.
It would be ideal if we could wrestle away this control from China, and Intel would have been an excellent choice, because if anybody would have the capacity to design, build, and manufacture it, aside from NVIDIA, Intel would be like one of the top companies that come to mind. It's too bad they're not going to go ahead with this, but just the reality of that's the way this situation is right now. And maybe we'll have something come up in the next little while. The CHIPS Act in the United States is trying to attract more opportunities to do business, this type of business in the United States. So maybe that could be an incentive, but who knows? But anyways, before we sign off, because I want to respect your time. Thank you for coming on the show. Just want to hand it over to you. Where could people find you? And if you want to say anything just before we close off, the floor is all yours.
All right. So I'm definitely going to be at the Baltic Honey Badger in September. If you want to find me online, I'm on Twitter, on Jan Braiins. Same Telegram handle.
Awesome. Check them out. And also, if you aren't using right now, if you are using an S9, S17, or soon to be S19, you're able to then take advantage of Braiins OS Plus. You might as well do it. And then while you're there, hook it up to the Braiins Pool, and the fees are then they eat it and you get it at the end. So that's the way to do it. So thank you so much, Jan, for coming on the show. This has been a great pleasure. And for everybody out there that's listening and watching, take care. PV will be back on Monday.
Thank you for having me.